Okay, ready to get this one going?
Yep.
Excellent. Just a quick introduction. I'm Dave Masten. I run a little company called Masten Space Systems out of Mojave. I'm not here to represent the company. I'm just going to give you some thoughts and ideas about Newt Gingrich's recent promise of a moon base by the end of his second term, which would be 2020. A lot of media has come out about it, mostly negative, a little bit positive. What I thought I'd like to do is a lot of people just say, well, it can't be done. The negative side, it just can't be done, you're crazy, why even talk about it? What I want to do is look at what would be necessary for a President of the United States to make the promise and have it happen. And for those, I see a few familiar faces from SpaceUp LA. Back there, I spent about 1 hour session talking about how to get back to the moon on an affordable basis. That is, on a basis of what the current human exploration budget, or not moon, back to the moon, on what the current human exploration budget is. And assuming that's the same budget going forward indefinitely. And that was more of a technical talk than what this is going to be. But what I wanted to talk about was, so what actually does need to get done? On a technical basis, there's no technical reason why it cannot be done. The quick overview of that 1 hour long session, shortened it up in 5 minutes, is that there are a number of papers out there by a bunch of really good rocket scientists, some of whom are at United Launch Alliance, and they pretty much laid out an entire architecture of how to get back to the moon, land on the moon, create moon bases. If you have ever had the chance to go visit the Bigelow Aerospace facility, you know they have plans for putting their habitats on the moon for what is considered in aerospace reasonable prices. So the technology is there. We know how to do it. We can do it fairly inexpensively if you can get the politics to go along. And the political considerations are where it becomes a real problem. And this goes, political considerations not only at the national level in Congress, but also out at the centers and at the individual contributor level of NASA and NASA's contractors. So the first thing that we're going to have to assume a Newt Gingrich president, who won't be president, unfortunately, is going to have to do is get out and convince NASA down to the individual contributor level that this is the right way to go and that this is the right thing. This is going to involve massive change within NASA to occur. I mean, massive change to occur. And anytime you have change, people are going to resist it, even if they would end up better off after the change. So that's the first thing. You've got to go get out and get everybody on board with this throughout NASA. And yes, that includes the Science Mission Directorate, who has absolutely nothing to do with the human spaceflight side. Because you don't want the people interested in the science missions going back to Congress and saying, hey, wait, they're going to take our money away. And there's always that fight going on politically between different NASA missions about who's getting funded for what. And over the last 20 years, SMD is always right to go back to Congress and say, hey, wait, they're trying to steal our money. Because that's really what has been happening, is human exploration has been stealing a lot of money that was initially appropriated for Science Mission Directorate missions. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is Congress. Understand what Congress people are there to do. They're there to get reelected. And how do they get reelected? No, believe it or not, it is not jobs in their districts. Jobs in the districts are nice. It helps them get reelected. But that is not the primary thing. The primary thing is campaign funds in their campaign chests. And where do those come from? Companies. Companies and individuals who are giving them money. Super PACs, even though it's not officially campaign funds, super PACs are very important these days. And so you're going to have to convince the contractors. The recent Constellation fiasco, I think Griffin did the right thing in laying out the architecture of Constellation, in that it got all of the existing contractor base on board and therefore made it possible for Congress to say yes to, and made it difficult for Congress to say no to when Obama came along and said, hey, wait a minute, this is too expensive. So we're going to have to deal with the politics of the contractor base. How do you make sure that ATK, Boeing, Lockheed still retain their chunk of funds so that they can make a profit off of this? This is where the politics really becomes a problem. How do you get the Congress people, how do you get the contractors on board with this? If you're going to get back to the moon, you're going to have to change a lot of things, which means, again, you're going to have to change the way contractors are doing things. So given that broad outline, it's possible. But does any president really have the bandwidth and the political capital to get it done? So that's probably where I'm going to leave this question up there. Yes, it is extremely bold. It's probably silly in that I don't think any president of the United States over the next many years is going to be able to enact that much change to get it done and go through all that politics. Otherwise, it's a multi-hundreds of billions of dollar project, and 2020 is just not enough time. But if we can get that change going, if we can get NASA to think like, oh, hey, it's okay to, instead of building our own big rocket, why don't we work on using existing space-proven hardware and make that work. It's okay to grab a Bigelow habitat and use that as a base on the moon. That's a major change. We'll go ahead and open it for questions.
Yes, if you knew for a fact that Gingrich could pull this off, would you vote for it?
No.
Right answer.
How did Columbus get back to the New World? It's basically the same politics, I would guess.
I would say it's not really the same politics. You have to understand, our modern notion of nation states did not exist at that time. That's a fairly relatively new invention. I mean, understand, Columbus got there because he found an investor. The investor happened to be a queen of Spain, but still, he found an investor and convinced an investor to put enough money into the project.
I heard Gingrich say, we need to get there before China, like that was the only reason to do it. I don't understand the reason to do it besides that, apparently. What is the reason for a moon base by 2020?
Dave, can you repeat the questions, please, for the...
Yes, I can. So, what is the reason for having a moon base by 2020, or
any year?
Or any year, or doesn't even have to be a moon base. What about any exploration? So, one of the things about exploration, a society that is doing science and doing exploration is a society that is growing. Societies, as they stop doing the exploration, as they stop trying to find out new things about the world, about the universe, is one that is going to go into collapse. We do it because we have no idea what we're going to discover up there. But something's probably going to come up, and that's going to become part of our economic infrastructure and create economic growth and create better lives for our children in the long run.
Do you think the Google Lunar X Prize will have any effect on a moon base, and do you see any competitors actually doing that?
Will the Google Lunar X Prize have an effect on moon base? I don't think so at this point. If somehow Newt were to magically become the Republican nominee and get elected, I don't see how those two could tie together in the near future, with enough time to actually get anything done by 2020.
Don't you think we're getting to the point where we don't have to rely on government to fund space projects anymore?
Well, so the question is don't I think that we're getting to the point where we don't have to rely on government to fund space projects? The first wave of exploration has traditionally been done by government, and mostly because we don't know what's out there, so we don't know how to convince private markets to fund that. And anything expensive, you're going to have to find people to put up money for, and you're going to have to convince them that it's a good reason. Usually you convince them it's a good reason by saying, I'm going to give you back 5 times what you give me, or more or less, depending on the maturity of your business and what you're trying to do. And governments can say, this is much longer term, this is much bigger, and I don't need to see a direct realization of profit on that.
John Spencer mentioned earlier today that there's $6 trillion tied up in stagnant capital. So it's doing nothing. Huge resource. And rather than just have these people that have that capital sitting on it, why not gamble or try something to see what's available?
If you can convince them, then you're going, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
I guess that's our job, isn't it?
There are more ways to lose money than get it.
yeah, there are lots of ways of losing money. They're really not interested in losing money. That's why there's a large amount of capital is not really doing anything right now, is because people are a little more concerned about how they do their investments. So,
well, like, just a side note, we have to be careful when we say losing money because it implies a loss, when it's really loss of control of one party of that money. Because the money goes to pay us to build our cool gadgets, and we pay our contractors, et cetera. So the money is never lost; it just filters through the system. I know it's obvious, but sometimes we forget that. That, you know,
the investor thinks he's lost the money if he doesn't get it back. And that's all that matters for that discussion.
They have lost
So,
what was their money.
yes.
So I mean, the problem.
Nothing is different though.
The problem is all science and exploration, the returns are so far out that you're not going to realize any return on the investment. So it needs to be an organization that supposedly has the longer term mentality. Now, one could argue whether Congress actually has a longer term mentality, seeing that they get reelected every 6 years for the Senate and 2 years for the House. But you know, the United States assumes itself to be something that's going to exist for infinity beyond us. So they should be able to look further out and be able to consider that. And this really comes down to, it's also a problem that science and exploration are public goods. That is, here is something that will provide a benefit to all of society, much greater than any individual investors can ever see out of it. And that becomes a real problem again. Basically, economics says if you have a true public good, it's not going to get provided at the optimal amount in a pure private market. So that's the other issue.
So you talked about the policy changes that you'd like to see to make it happen by 2020. What about from the technical side? What kind of rocket architecture or base architecture would you prefer to see that happen on the timescale?
So most of the papers describing various architectures that would allow something like that to happen in 2020. On the technical side, you're looking at propellant depots. You're looking at repurposed upper stage hardware into deep space hardware. That's pretty much the big things. You're looking at a lunar lander made out of Centaur Atlas V upper stage type thing. And again, propellant depots. You know, initially it would just be repurposed upper stages, serving as a depot. Supposedly, as you go along, you'd actually build real depots that are much larger.
Okay. How about the base itself, the shelter, and then supplies and maintenance, that kind of thing?
Bigelow habitats.
Yeah.
What are you going to do on your moon base? Once you establish it, what's it for? What do you want to do on it?
Golf.
When I was in high school, I worked at a golf course doing grounds crew, and I hate golf now, so I don't. Sorry. Well, I mean, initially it'll probably be very similar to what we're doing in Antarctica right now. There's a lot of scientific research that can be done from the moon base, and presumably somebody will find some reason, some good business case to be made, and we can follow it up with, you got the initial NASA astronauts there, and after a while maybe we have private astronauts who've arranged their rides through SpaceX or X-Corps or Masten or whoever.
How about for military purposes? Put a large telescope on there to spy.
Military purposes are, yeah, there's some legal issues with that. So.
And 2 weeks in the dark is hard to survive.
It violates treaties, actually.
Yeah.
Which means if we do it, could you not develop this moon-based hardware in such a way that it could be used for moon-based asteroid bases based on other solar system moons, etc.? Could it not be sold as not necessarily just a moon base, but the Lego set for the next generation?
Well, part of what I think really needs to happen is you need to be, in order to keep this affordable, you need to be working on building the infrastructure to do all sorts of beyond Earth orbit missions. So I mean, you're going to be looking at building up enough infrastructure where not only do you have a moon base, but now you can support maybe a space station in L4, L5, maybe something even further out. You'd be going to asteroids. One of the major changes you're going to have in order to get stuff done by 2020 is you're going to have to cut through a lot of NASA bureaucracy in the way they do things and pare it down. NASA has been increasingly, by the way, doing a lot more smaller projects with more focused teams and actually getting a lot of really good stuff out from where that's being tried. They're actually getting some really interesting results in a fairly quick time frame. So that's part of what needs to change within the NASA mindset there.
Is there anything on the moon from which you can make fuel, more propellant, or is everything going to have to be brought up from Earth?
Is there anything on the moon from which we can make more propellant?
Water.
There's lots of stuff there.
44% is oxygen.
Yeah, huge amount of oxygen, so you can at least take care of the oxygen side of it. There's also hydrogen on the moon. There's some difficulties. There's definitely some engineering challenges to make that actually work, make that actually happen. I don't know if that part can be done by 2020, but you could definitely get a good start on it at least.
One aspect of bases that I'd like to point out that we're neglecting, nobody's pointed out that the International Space Station is really, I think, an embarrassment in terms of what it's achieved so far, except from this point of view. They are testing in-orbit repairable life support equipment. To me, that's even more important than the return stage. They're aging it and testing it. That's important. At least I breathe air. I drink water. I think that's important.
Could we explore a couple of different definitions rather than moon base, moon resort, and rather than profit in terms of cash flow, profit in terms of media value, brand building, those kind of things?
Well, media value, brand building, all that returns back to individual investor profit. We can talk about resorts. That's not the role for government. Government's not there to provide a resort. The government moon base is about getting some scientists and engineers up there and doing cutting-edge research that is not going to be done by the private sector and cannot be done by the private sector. We want to talk about the possibility of resorts and other things that are private goods, then sure, but you have to find a company to do that, not anybody else.
Is there some way to subdivide the task so that you could arrange for it to be supported by like different states, different cities, and each group's chunk would be more digestible?
Is there some way of arranging the tasks, subdividing tasks out to individual states, to make this all more, more feasible. Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Actually, that's a bit of a problem that NASA has right now, is that they try to spread the work out as far and wide as they can so that they have as many Congress people supporting it. And it's sort of, it's an artificial splitting up that probably does not work very well. Of course, part of what I am talking about is getting group sizes smaller for specific projects within the overall program. So there's a balance there. Yes, you need to split it up a little bit, but I think the split up needs to occur for technical and management reasons and not for convincing Congress to go along reasons. And that's a tough balance to make.
That wasn't quite what I was getting at. I'm thinking of the public good aspect. If your team is part of a major effort, you tend to have more enthusiasm for it. I'm not assuming that anybody's going to make a profit.
I'm not saying anything about the profit here either. I don't know where the, I guess I don't know where the disconnect here is in the question.
Well, you seem to be talking about, you know, spreading the work into people's congressional districts.
That's how you.
I was making,
that's spreading the work into the right congressional districts and actually more importantly into the right contractors is how you keep Congress in support and therefore have money to do the program.
But basically what you're saying is it has to be a profit. And that gets us out of the common good regime then.
Once you can identify a profit, then presumably companies will go after it and skip the government altogether, and you have Congress out of the loop.
You've discussed very succinctly a U.S. moon base by 2020. Do you feel that international cooperation would take longer, or be even, second question, would it be more feasible?
So I've discussed U.S. moon base because that's what Newt Gingrich basically said. My personal feelings on adding international involvements would actually make it shorter. I think international involvement would be very good. Of course, a Newt Gingrich administration wouldn't bother. But that's part of why
We have to fix all the time, which we haven't chosen to do after 10 years, 12 or 13 years.
But yeah, I think international involvement could be, I mean, and here again, it's can the international partners play in a new regime where you're actually trying to get a much more aggressive project done in a way that, I mean, quite frankly, ESA has as much bureaucracy as NASA and then some. So can they fit in? That's a big question. I don't know. I would hope that the international community could join us. Even worse funding problems than NASA does, so they might not be interested in such an international project. That's probably true. Absolutely true. But I would still ask. I would not, unlike some, intentionally leaving potential partners out.
And if they see it as a boondoggle and that it's not going to work, they're not going to want to waste money on it. But I think if you've got a moon base that seems viable and has a future to it, then an international partner, you know, other countries are going to look and go, either we put up the money and get in with the U.S. now, or we're screwed and we're that country that doesn't have a base on the moon, and all of our people are looking at us going, they did it, why can't we? Where were you? Get out of office. I mean, is that... I think that's probably part of it. If you came up with a rational plan, other people would get on board with the plan. But somebody's got to come up with a plan and put money behind it first before everybody else is going to jump on board.
So
like
to sum that whole comment up into one sentence, you have to make it look realistic, or yeah, the international partners aren't going to be on board. If you can make it realistic, absolutely. Absolutely, they will be on board.
So we keep talking about Gingrich moon base and all the stuff surrounding that. Something to remember is that the current president tried to change the direction of NASA. He tried to take away Ares 5, tried to stop NASA from building a heavy lift vehicle, and then the Senate in Congress said, whoa, 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 what are you doing?
The alleged free market people.
Stop that.
So, yeah,
So whether it's Gingrich or Obama, Congress actually has a lot to play in this, more than the president. Gingrich, for all we know, has seen the Bigelow pictures and thinks that's what's going to be out there. That's his U.S. base in his mind.
Absolutely, agreed 100%. That's what I was saying. That's part of what a president's going to have to do, is spend a lot of political capital and a lot of time with Congress and NASA contractors, because NASA contractors can lobby Congress. NASA can't, but NASA contractors can. And they do. So yes, you're going to have to work on them and make sure that NASA contractors are going to be happy under the new plan, and that they're getting their chunk of the pie they want.
Whenever it is, whenever it is.
And you're going to have to convince Congress to go along with it. And it's a major challenge. And there's a lot of political capital that's going to have to be spent to get that done.
Do you have an idea of what the overall emotional theme of that pitch would be? During the moon missions, it was, beat the Russians. But what would it be this time?
So the overall theme of the pitch.
Yeah, we were going to the moon because.
Yeah, in the 1960s for Apollo, it was all about we are going to show that our missiles can reach any target anywhere accurately. Hint, hint, Soviet Union. For this, the theme really just has to be, this is all about science and exploration, and it's something that we do. Whether that's all of humanity, or depending on your political persuasion, if that's that's just what Americans do. Yeah, that's something we do. It's something we want to do. It's something that provides a good over long-term, healthy societies explore. When you stop exploring, you become an unhealthy society.
I think that we're out of time, actually. I don't know. Maybe closing comments, or
So, I have no closing comments, but support Gingrich's space policy. Don't necessarily support him. Thank you.